The big case in small-town Acme, Mandy Stavik's case. Mandy Stavik went jogging after the big Thanksgiving meal on November 24, 1989 with her family dog, Kyra, a German Shepherd. She jogged the same route every day, from Strand Street to the Nooksack River. It is only about 5 miles from her home. 2 hours later, Kyra returned without Mandy, causing her mother, Mandy Stavik, to panic and worry. She contacted almost everyone who came to her mind. However, no one knew where Mandy was. 3 days later, Mandy was found dead, floating in the Nooksack River. The tragedy made the small community living in Acme suspicious and afraid of each other. There was a murder on, amidst the small town that they thought was always safe. Acme is a small town located on highway in Whatcom County, Washington State. The residents know each other, which is why they are known for not locking their doors and casually leaving their keys in their ignition. The Mandy Stavik tragedy has changed the atmosphere in Acme. What exactly happened to Mandy? How will the case be solved after 30 years? Before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Mandy Stavik was born in Bellingham, Washington, on April 16, 1971, to Mary and Glenn Stavik. For 3 years, the Stavik family lived in the Palmer, Alaska region, until Mary and Glenn decided to divorce. Mary and her 3 children, Lee, Molly, and Mandy, moved to Acme, a town where Mandy's best friend also moved and lived. Before the fateful incident happened to Mandy, her oldest brother, Brent Stavik, died mysteriously in Anchorage, Alaska in 1975. He was hunting when suddenly someone shot him multiple times and he died. The case remains unsolved. When Mary moved in 1974, Acme's population was less than 350 people. They went to the local dinner for breakfast and a meal, then went shopping at the same place, Acme General Store. Naturally, all the residents knew each other. Mandy attended Mount Baker High School, where she was known as a cheerful and bright child. Everyone loved and liked her. She had no enemies. Her grades were good. She was the type of student who had a bright future. She joined the band and was good at playing the saxophone and clarinet. Good at using Japanese and sign language. She is also interested in several athletic activities such as basketball, softball, horse riding, and running track. She is always good at many things and gets a lot of attention. When Mandy disappeared, she was only 18 years old. She graduated from Mount Baker High School in 1989, went on to study at Central Washington University. She wanted to become a commercial pilot and was in her first year. She returned to Acme with her boyfriend, Rick Zender, to spend the Thanksgiving holiday. They have been dating for 3 years since high school, although their relationship has been on and off. That afternoon, Mandy only went out with her dog. Usually, her mom followed her on her bike. Lee, who was playing at his friend Jeremy Anderson's house, which is halfway to Stavik's, saw Mandy. He passed the house on his way home. However, 2 hours later, it was only the dog who returned. The residents of Acme began a massive search. Mandy left the house wearing a light-colored t-shirt, teal green sweatpants, light blue shoes with purple stripes, and was listening to a Walkman. 2 days later, the green jogging pants were found on a small road by a search team. However, Mary said, "I didn't remember exactly what she was wearing, but I didn't think they could have been. For one thing, they were dirty, and they had ripped holes in them, and Mandy wouldn't have ever worn anything like that." The pants were never proven to be related to Mandy's case. The police were also at first suspicious and investigated Rick Zender carefully. However, Zender had an alibi, and he explained everything cooperatively and honestly. 3 days later, on November 27, 1989, Ron Peterson, a sergeant at the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, found Mandy's body in the Nooksack River. She was unclothed, wearing only shoes and socks in the knee-deep stream. There was also a beating wound on her head. According to the autopsy results, she died from drowning. Of course, Mandy's death by drowning was highly unbelievable. Detective Ron Peterson found no signs of Mandy's attempt to save herself, especially since Mandy was known to be good at swimming. It was impossible for her to drown in such shallow river water. Her body, which was found in unusual conditions, must have been sexually assaulted beforehand. Peterson, who had previously learned about DNA evidence at the FBI Academy in Quantico, found DNA evidence in Mandy's body in the form of semen from an unknown man. Saliva DNA of 30 men, including her boyfriend, did not match. The detectives working on this case also tried to consult with a special team handling the Green River serial murder case. But Whatcom County detectives were told that Mandy Stavik's case was different from the profile developed for the suspected Green River killer. The only eyewitness found was a pickup truck driver who saw Mandy jogging to her home. The case was stuck for 2 decades. A potential perpetrator came from reports of mothers who had been abused by the perpetrator when they lived in Acme. On June 1, 2013, Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson went to Birch Bay Waterslide with their children to have some fun. They had left Acme, now lived near Bellingham, and had both attended Mount Baker High School. While watching their kids have fun on the waterslide, they talked about their life in Acme and came to the subject of the Mandy Stavik tragedy. Suddenly Backstrom says,
"I am sure I know who killed her." "Oh, I do too."
The conversation was a big clue for the police. Anderson recounted that a few years after Mandy's death, that night she was alone at home with her infant son. Suddenly, a man she knew was a friend of her husband's, both Mount Baker graduates, came to the house after hunting to borrow a phone. The man, Timothy Tim Forrest Bass, dialed the wrong number or pretended to until Anderson heard a beep 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 that made her suspicious. Anderson remembers Tim walking through the kitchen, back to his room. Tim told him, and he said that he used to drive by our house and that he had always been in love with me and wanted to make love to me. Anderson refused even though she was very scared, while Tim continued to convince her. Anderson doesn't remember exactly how she managed to get Tim out of her house. Finally, I told him I would call the police and somehow, I don't even remember exactly how, I got him out of my house, she said. Backstrom had an unpleasant experience with the same person when she was 15 years old, while Tim was 21. Backstrom went to the restaurant after they watched a summer softball game in 1989 with another friend, Dan, who would later marry her. Backstrom sat between Dan and Tim. At the restaurant, Tim began to flirt aggressively with her. He would talk about my eyes and say they were beautiful. Then he took a pen out of the cup holder and would start rubbing it along my knees, Backstrom said. Tim's actions made Backstrom uncomfortable. She tried to take advantage of Dan because it was his presence that prevented Tim from doing anything worse to her. From then on, Backstrom tried hard to restrict her interactions with Tim. Both women thought that there must be other victims besides them. Tim is a predator. It could be that Mandy's case also happened because of him. However, they kept their suspicions to themselves because it would be very inconvenient if it caused an uproar in such a small community. But after getting support from a friend's similar story, Anderson dared to report it to a classmate who worked as a detective at the Whatcom Sheriff's Office. The detectives immediately went to visit Tim at his home, asking him if he knew Mandy. But Tim pretended not to remember her. Then he said, "Oh yeah, she was a girl that Hay found on the river." Whereas Mandy's case was very big and it was impossible for anyone to know who she was. So, the police asked for his DNA, but Tim refused. Finally, the police tried to follow him all night while he was working as a bakery driver, hoping that Tim would throw something away with the DNA, but it wasn't that easy. Tim, who works with gloves on a daily basis, has never even been seen throwing away his gloves or other items. He has become very careful since the police became suspicious of him. That's why the case was stuck again, until help came from Kim Wagner, a woman who was Tim Bass's co-worker. When investigators approached Wagner to ask about Tim, she refused to answer anything. Instead, she directed the investigators to contact the Human Resources Department of the bakery where she worked. A few years later, Wagner, her husband, and friends gathered at a bar. They talked about Tim Bass, who had lived on the same street as Mandy Stavik. This light went off in my head and I thought, is that why the police were at my work? Wagner said. Wagner knew Tim as someone who had a short temper, who would get angry at the smallest things and make his colleagues not like him very much. He never even greeted Wagner by her first name, other than that woman, a term that Wagner found demeaning. Wagner participated herself because investigators are prohibited from using civilians to gather evidence. However, if civilians gave them evidence, they could accept it. One day, the office received a water cooler. Wagner saw Tim drinking from a plastic cup and threw it away. "I looked in the garbage and my heart was like beating out of my chest," she said. "I grabbed it and I put it in my desk drawer. I was like, oh my God, that just happened." Wagner handed over the plastic cup and can of cola that Tim had drunk. She went on to share her reason for helping with the case. "The reason I wanted to know was I'm a mom now. If something happened to my daughter, I'd want someone to help me. And the thought of her mom never having an answer of who did that to her daughter, if I could help her find that peace, I wanted to do it." 3 months later, Tim's DNA matched with the DNA found inside Mandy Stavik's body. On December 12, 2017, 50-year-old Tim was arrested at the bakery where he worked. "I've gone through all these measures to make sure you guys didn't get my DNA. How did this happen? Where did I screw up?" he said. In fact, 6 months after Mandy's death, Tim married Gina Malone at the age of 22. In January 1990, they moved to Everson, which is located about 19 miles from Acme, and had 3 children. Tom Bass, his younger brother, said that Tim was a quiet and loner. One night, he broke up with his high school girlfriend over the phone. Tim threatened to kill himself, suddenly grabbed a gun and fired it into the air. Since then, he has been disgusted and disrespectful towards women. At first, Tim said he had nothing to do with Mandy, either directly or indirectly. However, his claims changed strangely. He said it was more of a friendship type thing. "We just talked, and then it just kind of grew into more of a physical thing, and we didn't even really do it that much. It was more kissing and stuff." The night before Mandy died, she showed up at Tim's house. No one could confirm Tim's closeness to Mandy, except his father, who passed away a decade ago. Mandy's sister Molly Brighton said, "There's no way my sister would have had a physical relationship with Tim Bass. She was way out of his league, to put it bluntly." Malone, who was Tim's wife at the time, said they were together the day Mandy disappeared. Malone also said she saw Mandy jogging in front of her house. At the trial in May 2019, the prosecutor again asked the witness about Mandy and Tim's relationship. However, no one had ever seen them together. Tom Bass also testified that his brother was nervous when investigators asked for his DNA sample. Because when the incident happened, Tim, his brother, and his father were not asked for DNA samples like 30 other local men. They were off the radar of investigators' suspicions at the time. Tim also told Tom to say that he had also slept with Mandy. But Tom refused to lie for his brother. Malone, who had already applied for a divorce, retracted his earlier testimony. She testified solely to protect herself and her children from Tim, who is known as a very controlling person. Tim likes to tell her what to do, what to wear, or who to talk to. Their married life was unhappy. Malone felt imprisoned. She was treated like a servant to Tim. Malone said that she couldn't remember ever going to the Bass family home on Thanksgiving. On May 24, 2019, the jury convicted Timothy Forrest Bass of first-degree murder. In his speech, he said, "I would first like to say that I am 100% innocent of this crime. I wish no ill will towards anyone here, not even today, but I am having a hard time with this." He was sentenced to 320 months in prison.